Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon for our webinar on eSports. We have our panelists that will be talking to you and sharing this presentation about, and you'll be able to connect with us and them afterwards for questions as well. If you do have questions during the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A portion, whichever would be easiest for you. And at the end, we can cover any questions that you may have. I will send it off to Andrea and Seth, and you guys can take it away.
All right, Sarah, thanks. That's great. Before we jump in with what we're going to be talking about today with eSports, Kathleen and Dean, these are your people that you've invited. So do you want to add anything before we get started?
No, we just wanted to say welcome. We hope you enjoy the session. It's going to be very informative. If you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to us. During the portion of this particular presentation, or even afterwards. Well, welcome.
Well said, Kathleen, and I don't think I can add anything to that. Welcome, and let's enjoy the webinar. Grab a box of popcorn.
And Seth, you want to say anything before we jump in?
No, let's get going. Happy Friday, everybody.
All right, there we go. Well, we're going to start with just some basic information about eSports in terms of the benefits to our high school students and middle school students, and even at some point I'll bring up elementary school students and what eSports or gaming looks like in elementary school. But here's some real basic information about a lot of school districts are starting to map a high school curriculum to a lot of the skills that are associated with eSports and with gaming: journalism, broadcasting, engineering, mathematics, computer science, coding. Those are all things that we see as a part of the skills that are developed by students who are involved in eSports and gaming programs. There's also a lot of careers associated with this. And now we're seeing more and more colleges develop formal eSports competitive programs in their educational organizations. And they're actually giving scholarships for students to come to their schools and get their degrees, but also be a part of their eSports teams. And then, of course, this is probably no surprise at all, where we see improved problem-solving skills after participations in eSports programs. We've worked with NASAF, and this is, the North American Scholastic Esports Federation. And these are a list of some of the schools that are involved in NASAF, and they have a strong connection also to colleges and higher education. And what I love about their logo, if you will, is that on the right side in the green area, you'll see software developers, shoutcasters, streamers, journalists, fandom art and media, this whole area under content creators. It lends itself so beautifully to a career and technical education program in our schools. And these are really jobs that kids can access right after college, in some cases, even right after high school. But it's really a big component of what career and technical education focuses on, or what our schools focus on in general. So there's a real great connection between eSports and gaming and future careers. So we've seen a lot of growth in programs since the pandemic. During the pandemic, these programs grew just because they were a great way for students to get together with other students in their own schools, but also with schools in their regions or even potentially across the country. So there has been a big growth since 2020. We started to see it before 2020 at a lot of the conferences and things that I was going to. I was seeing a lot of vendors there, a lot of school districts there with students showcasing eSports programs, a lot of administrators working with their partners to talk about how they got started. So we'll be building on a lot of this information. And then, of course, additional research, right? These are all outcomes based on students' involvements in eSports programs. Visual acuity and attention, scientific reasoning, improved digital and print literacy. So we really do see a connection between participation in eSports program and these different skill areas. One of the things that I really like when I look at research and its connection to esports, and this study was done by NASEF, so they actually did a multi-year study, and this is some of the findings. These are some of the findings from the 4th year of their study, and you'll see higher GPA, personal growth, satisfaction with school, degree completion, and persistence, right, as all increased outcomes. I really like the fact that we see it fosters personal growth and increased satisfaction with school. And one of the things that's really nice about building the esports programs, and even if we look at the career and technical education pathways that are developed as a part of esports programs, is that students become more connected to a community in their schools. So it gives them the motivation to come to school, to contribute to that community, and to really be a part of things that are happening. Previous to the development of esports programs, perhaps they didn't have that strong connection to school socially or academically. And this really can be a game changer for many of those students who didn't feel that connection previously. So before we jump into the actual elements of planning and building your program, we have some of the pitfalls that can, pop up as you're doing this. So I'm going to turn this over to Seth so he can kind of bring some of those to our attention.
Yeah, absolutely. As we've built some programs and with our vendor partners and such, some of the pitfalls that kind of pop up a lot is really that first one, lack of long-term planning. A lot of schools will say, hey, we want an esports program. We're just going to build a small room or get some kids gaming. But there's no long-term planning of how to really get those students involved, how to budget for what you really want to accomplish, and really starting off with what do you want to accomplish with an esports program. Insufficient academic support. Andrea touched on how that CTE is connected, how STEM is connected, but academic support for the athletes. I like to call them athletes because you think of these players the same as you would think of a football player or a basketball player. They have academic support. The coaches and the teachers work together for that academic support. Lack of connection to curricular offerings. I kind of touched base on the CTE and the STEM. They go hand in hand. So really putting that, and this kind of goes in with the lack of long-term planning. It's part of that planning. Neglecting student well-being, just not giving them support in balancing gaming, balancing academics, balancing social emotional, balancing teamwork. So really having a plan and how you're going to work with the students and their well-being, and then not including the students early and often. I mean, that's the biggest thing. She went over some stats about including students and connecting them to schools, and some schools and some programs have just gone out and said, we're going to do an esports and we're going to offer this game, and none of their students don't play that game. Like, they don't have that. So then you can't just build it and they will come. They have to be a part of the build. So
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Seth.
thank you, Dr. Dare. Next one. Yeah, here we go.
Yeah, here we go. So, I mean, when we look at what it means to plan a program for, not just short-term getting it off the ground, but that long-term, projection. How do you build a program? How do you maintain it? And how do you sustain it for the long run? So we've broken this down into a couple of areas, and our program really looks at planning a walkthrough, which is really connected to products, as well as the installation of those products, and then long-term professional development. And people say, professional development for esports, what does that look like? So we'll get into that. But when we talk about planning, the planning service is really designed to help school districts envision a program. So where do we start? What does that look like? Do we start at the club level? Do we start at a competitive level? What do we need to start at those different levels? What do we need if it is a club level? How do we involve students? How do we even know if students are interested? How do we know how many students are interested? I was working with one school and they thought they'd have 20 or so kids, and they ended up having 100 kids on that first day at their first meeting. So it would have been nice for them to know that, hey, we have 100 kids, in a high school of 2,000 students that are interested in esports. Like, we just never knew that. So, running a student survey to really garner interest and then planning from there. And really, like I said before, everything from starting at that club level, developing a competitive team, and then integrating it into our school curricular program, where we actually have a CTE pathway. And how do we build that? The last thing you want to do is invest in building these beautiful gaming spaces and then have them sit empty throughout the day, right? So how do we make them useful and a part of our academic program throughout the day? So when we talk about planning, we really look at one-to-one consultations for program planning and development. Everything we do is extremely customized, and we will work with you to really start where you are, gather data based on student interest survey, running focus group, running interviews if that's something that you're interested in, and really identifying what that interest is, and then understanding what type of supports are available. So do you have to convince anybody that the program's viable, right? And that it's really connected to academics in any way? Do you need information to get to the superintendent, to your assistant superintendents for curriculum and instruction, to really educate your principals about what these programs look like, and start to gather information and map a 3 to 5 year timeline, a multi-year timeline of what this could look like. So at the end of our data gathering phase, we actually create a deliverable for school districts with a summary report that allows for leadership planning, identifying coaching resources, and then really having identified potential spaces. And Seth, do you want to say anything about that process where we work with districts to identify spaces and what that looks like?
I think there's a slide later on, but I can touch base on it a little
Oh,
bit.
that's right. I forgot. No, let's.
Yep.
We'll do that. Here you go. It's right there.
I was going to say, it should be, here we go. You let it in. Yeah, so with our vendor partners, so again, this is a service that we provide, and Bluum is Bluum because of the awesome vendor partners that we have. Vendors do different things very well, and we help with bringing that together and really building it out. So this is just a quick example of what would happen on a walkthrough. So you'll see in the upper right screen, that's a 2D layout, and this district had probably 3 or 4 or 5 of those. I'm really looking at how that room is involved and how it's used not only after school but during school with the STEM program. So you see there's some spots for 3D printers and different things like that, and some storage and whatnot. Going through and getting a good layout of where outlets are and networking is and doors are and different things like that. And then once you decide, yeah, this is kind of the setup we like to go, Spectrum Industries, one of our vendor partners, can do the 2D and then also give you kind of a 3D look and layout of what it might look like, to really give you a good picture, for lack of a better word, of what you're going to end up with. And then we can bring in product installation and integration as well. And really, the beauty of Bluum is that project management throughout the whole process.
So also we have professional development, and we look at professional development not just from the standpoint of your coaches and supporting your coaches, because NASEP has some really great resources for school districts for coaching, really getting you up to speed with how to be a coach, what that looks like, how to coach an esports team. We look at professional development through that lens of really building an awareness within your learning community about the life of a student who is a gamer, right? What does that look like? And what are our developmental expectations for students when, at different ages, when they're participating in online environments and in a gaming environment? So building that awareness from why the interest, why does this appeal to so many kids? Why is this an important social component for so many of these kids? And how does that tie into what we think about as, our academics, but also our other after-school activities or athletics and arts? And how does that fit into it? So understanding our students' virtual worlds, what are our developmental expectations? And then we also look at esports and STEM and what's the connection there, and esports and learning. I mentioned quite a bit about research that's happening in this area, and certainly there's opportunities there for professional development around that. The other component is integration with student wellness, because that's really become a big area of focus too. So not just physical wellness, but mental health and well-being as well. So how does esports and gaming integrate with that overall picture of student well-being? Some of the other things that we support are change management in terms of building that awareness, making students aware of the program, making teachers aware of the program, and managing the messaging for that, and then building your capacity to really have these programs. We talked about space, we talked a little bit about coaching, and we talked about the research behind it, but building the capacity for these programs in your system, identifying students, that's all part of that. And then I'm also seeing many school districts kind of leverage this investment in esports to look at increasing student enrollment and then retaining students once they are in their school system. So what does esports planning look like at the district level? Well, we want schools to be really familiar with one of the leagues. We have looked at NASEF, the North American Scholastic Esports Federation, like I mentioned. There's others out there. There's a high school esports league as well, and there's a couple of others, and there might be regional ones in your state even. It's important to identify a certified staff member to be the school's or a district's coach or manager. Again, NASEP just happens to have a program for that, really identifying that coach that's going to take the lead. There's no fee to join NASEP, so you can certainly do that. And then you want to decide where you're going to start. So you're going to start as a club or even a class, right? I've seen a lot of middle school programs for 7th and 8th graders where they really have, they've started as an esports, they've started esports as an elective, right? So what does that look like? I always recommend starting small and scaling from there, right? So you want to develop a vision and a mission for your program. So what is your vision? What's your long-term vision? And how does this connect to your school's mission statement? And then identifying your values and writing a multi-year strategic plan with objectives and a timeline. Some of the things that we touch on, you want to make decisions about an ESRB rating. What are you going to have open for the kids to access to in terms of gaming? You want to be able to manage expectations. You don't want students to rush into a club to then only be disappointed because they can't play some of the games where you're going to start with Rocket League or Mario Kart, and they were hoping to have access to Fortnite. So really considering what are you going to allow in terms of the types of games and the ESRB ratings for those games. And that's an important conversation to have with the students as well, because you want to understand what their expectations are coming into this too. One big thing is don't try to accomplish everything the first year. That's why a strategic plan is so important. And that's what Seth mentioned earlier, really making a conscious decision about we're starting here and we want to scale as we go along. Even in terms of scaling in terms of your product, right? We're going to start with these desktops and we're going to start with 6 of them. And we're going to buy the mouse and the keyboard that has to go with it. And we're going to make an investment in some gaming chairs. Maybe year 2, as you start to think about scaling up, what you do is, well, we're going to buy desks for those 6 workstations that we have. And then in year 3, we're going to increase it to 5 gaming stations, right? So that we have desks and chairs and desktops for all 10 stations. Or maybe it looks a little bit different. Maybe scaling means building the space at different schools rather than focused on one school. So only you can really determine that, but really looking at where you're starting, how you want to scale, and what that's going to mean. Not just in terms of students and interest, but also in terms of financial obligations. Because once you start buying things, you're going to have to factor in refresh cycles and things like that. So you want to have a pipeline for continuing to support what you build, and then also understand the fiscal resources that are necessary to maintain that.
And Andrew, I'd like to pop in there about not only the equipment and looking how you're building that out, but how you build it out involvement, how you build it out community involvement. How are we now leveraging this program to retain students, to bring students in, to showcase what you're doing for students, to really help them with their growth and social, emotional, mental, all that stuff. So that's part of what we help you do is here's your one, physical, mental, all the aspects of the sport, and then keep going. So
no, I think that's a really good point,
Thank you.
Steph, as well, because you want to be able to message this to the community at large and also to parents in terms of understanding, why you're making this investment. So really great point. So this is at a building level. And when we look at it at the building level, it's similar to the district, but again, we want to connect with the building or district leader, be familiar with whatever league you join or federation you join, making sure that you have a coach or a general manager joining NASAF, right? But then you want to get into the club a little bit more. What kind of requirements does your school district have for a club? Are there specific structures in order to have a club? And what does that look like? I know that sometimes you have to have bylaws. There needs to be a president and a vice president, a secretary and a treasurer. You need to meet pretty frequently. So really that can vary district by district, but it's a good conversation to have with the students at the club level in terms of establishing bylaws and really establishing club and team policies and procedures. This way, everyone on the team has an understanding of what the expectations are if they're going to be a part of that. Some districts even have a GPA requirement, right? That, your GPA can't fall below something in order to continue to participate in a club. So those are all important things to think about as you put the club together. One of the other things, we have send out the gaming survey to students to see what they like to play. It says they don't have to be electronic. What we're seeing a lot of too is the development of eSports programs or gaming programs, even at the elementary level. And a lot of those start with analog options. So playing Yu-Gi-Oh cards, playing Pokemon, even playing chess, right? And building that conversation about strategy into those analog games, and then growing those into an eSports or an online gaming platform. The other thing that I see a lot at the elementary level is just introduction to digital citizenship and online behaviors with games like Animal Crossing. So we see a lot of that at the elementary level. Anything you want to add here, Seth, about starting a program at the building level and the type of conversation that should be happening?
I think you covered most of it, and it really, the beauty of this is it depends individually in the school. There's a lot of different layers. It's not a stamp like every school should do this thing. So it's really, that's part of the planning, is really getting into it and understanding what you want and how we can make that happen for you. So
Yeah, 100%.
that's about it.
So in terms of what we're doing at Bluum when it comes to eSports and supporting districts with the planning and the production and the professional development associated with the eSports program, right now we have a pilot available where we're working with districts who are interested in creating a multi-year plan. There's no cost for that at this time. You could work through Kathleen and Dean if you want to make a connection, and we can take a look at what that would look like. It is a $5,000 value. We're at ISTE right now, so that's a big focus for Bluum. We'll be there, and we are going to be going to market with this at ISTE, and we'll be talking to school districts about this at ISTE as well. And on July 15th is when we'll start charging for this. But the other thing is that there is funding available for eSports programs. And many school districts have not fully expended all of their ESSER funds. And we have until, I think, next September to fully expend that third round of funding. But many districts are using ESSER funds to get their program off the ground, right? To get it started and buy some equipment, buy some furniture and set it up and do some long-term planning. So there are some funds available through ESSER. The other thing that we're really starting to see is the development of career and technical education pathways around esports. I know I spoke about them early on, but school districts are funding their esports program through the career and technical education programs as well, because those programs are leading the way for students to get involved from a career perspective, as opposed to a club or a competitive perspective. That's sort of interesting way to look at it as well. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Let me go back. Oops, here we go. Okay, so that's what Bluum has available. And Seth, do you want to talk about any of our partners in terms of products or anything else? We talked a little bit about furniture. Anybody else or anything else you want to mention?
Yeah, I'll mention it. Yeah, we talked about the furniture just because of the process and the planning part of that with our vendor partners. Again, going back to the fact that they all do their different things very, very well, and have built these rooms and built these arenas. So that's the beauty in working with Bluum. And this is we have a lot of different vendors that are really good at different things, whether that's the PCs or the peripherals or the rooms or the networking. And we can build it to you fit. If you have a specific brand that you prefer, we can lead with that. So we can really customize it to you. And I just want to go back and touch point on, some of you on this call were like me about 5 years ago. I was in the classroom anti-gaming because my students didn't finish their math homework. And I'm like, what are you doing? I knew you're online gaming because you hear talking about it. And thankfully I had a student that really flipped my mind a little bit and was watching a YouTube video, watching someone play, I think Call of Duty or something like that. And I asked why, why are you watching Call of Duty? And they were talking about learning. I asked them, are you trying to learn how to play Call of Duty? They're like, no, I'm just watching it to enjoy it. And I was like, who just watches it to enjoy it? And they said, Mr. Brown, did you watch the hockey game last night? And I was like, yeah, Wild is awesome. And then he's like, well, were you doing it to learn how to play? And I was like, it's what they enjoy. And then once I started getting into it and the same things that I was able to experience in athletics and that type of stuff, that's what these students are doing and the beauty and why we're doing this. So yes, there's product and there's all this stuff, but going back to retaining kids, getting kids involved in the school, and being able to learn the things of teamwork and all the pieces in that bubble of NASEF, it's an amazing thing. So I just get excited about being able to help students experience the things that they should experience at schools.
All right, awesome. Thank you for sharing that story. That was great.
I have a question. Are we at question points now?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, you talked about the cost in one of your slides a minute ago, and you had a cost of 5,000, and then you had a date of July 15th. Can you clarify that for me? Is the service free until the 15th of July, or?
Sure. I would say that anybody who's on this webinar that reaches out to you and Kathleen, we're happy to honor that as a pilot at this point. And so I'd love to have a conversation just to see what people are thinking, and then we can go from there. But right now, anybody who's joined us can certainly access the service at no cost right now. We will start charging otherwise to school districts, that haven't necessarily been on this call after July 15th.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yep. Sarah, do we have any questions?
It doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat right now. If you do have questions, feel free to put them in. If you think of questions later on during the day, feel free to reach out to grants@bluum.com. You'll be receiving a follow-up from this webinar with that email linked and this presentation and the video of this recording. So feel free to use that. If you have questions, you can email us there, and I will check one more time for good measure. it looks like we are good to go. Thank you all for joining